I never used to look forward to my birthday. For me, May 15th was just another day, only with an extra year added on. In Seville, where I lived, May is a beautiful month, with the scent of orange blossoms perfuming every corner of the city. But that year, my 30th birthday felt different. Not because I wanted to do anything special, but because James, my husband, insisted we celebrate. "Come on, Lucy. Turning 30 doesn't happen every day," he told me a week earlier as we were having breakfast in our small kitchen. The sun streamed through the window, lighting up his face in a way that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him. His warm brown eyes seemed to hide something, a spark of excitement I hadn't seen in a long time. "I don't know, James," I replied, stirring my coffee listlessly. "You know I'm not really into parties." It was true. Since I was little, I'd preferred spending my birthdays at home with my parents and my younger sister, Sophie. No grand celebrations or extravagant gifts. Just the four of us, a homemade cake, and, if I was lucky, some rice pudding that my grandmother used to make. But James wouldn't take no for an answer. "It won't be a party, sweetheart. Just the two of us. A quiet dinner, what do you think?" His proposal surprised me. Lately, our relationship had grown a bit cold. The long hours I spent at the law firm where I worked and my rotating shifts at the hospital left little room for intimacy. Perhaps this was exactly what we needed. "All right," I finally conceded with a small smile. "But nothing over the top, okay?" The days flew by amidst emergency shifts and overnight calls. I barely saw James that week, which wasn't unusual. When we did cross paths at home, he seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts. Sometimes I caught him glancing at his phone with a smile that vanished the moment he noticed me. I tried not to overthink it. "It's just work stress," I told myself, trying to quiet the little voice that whispered something was wrong. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up alone in bed. James had already left for work, but he'd left a note on my nightstand. "Happy birthday, my love. Tonight will be special. I love you." Those simple words dispelled my doubts. Maybe I was just being paranoid, imagining problems where there were none. The day at the hospital was exhausting. One emergency after another left me barely time to eat. My colleagues, Elena and Michael, tried to convince me to have a drink after my shift to celebrate, but I reminded them I had plans with James. "Ah, how romantic," Elena joked, winking at me. "You'll tell us all about tonight tomorrow." I arrived home exhausted but excited. I took a quick shower and put on the red dress that James had given me for our last anniversary. "This dress drives me wild," he used to say every time I wore it. I applied minimal makeup, just a touch of mascara and some gloss on my lips. I left my hair damp, letting it fall loosely over my shoulders. While waiting for James in the living room, I mentally retraced our history. We had met in medical school, me studying to be a doctor and him studying law in the building next door. It was love at first sight. After graduation, we had a small wedding ceremony at La Giralda. It had been 5 years since then, 5 years of ups and downs, of building a life together, of supporting each other in our careers. The sound of a key in the lock pulled me out of my reverie. James entered, wearing a suit I hadn't seen him in before. He looked handsome, but there was something in his expression that unsettled me. He seemed nervous, almost anxious. "Happy birthday, Lucy," he said as he stepped forward to kiss my cheek. His cologne, usually one of my favorites, seemed overwhelmingly strong tonight. "Thanks, honey," I replied, forcing a smile. "Shall we go out?" James shook his head. "I was thinking we could have dinner here. More intimate, don't you think?" Without waiting for a response, he headed to the kitchen and returned with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. As he poured, I noticed his hands trembling slightly. We sat on the sofa, and an awkward silence hung between us, more uncomfortable than ever before. After a long sip from his glass, James suddenly stood up. "Oh, I almost forgot. I have something for you." He returned carrying a plain white bag, which he set on the coffee table. With a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he urged me to open it. "Come on, open it. It's your gift." My heart pounded faster than usual as I took the bag. It felt light, and for a moment I wondered if it might contain some piece of jewelry. But when I opened it, I found nothing but an envelope and invitation, to be precise. "What is this?" I asked, my voice breaking as I pulled the invitation from the envelope. James stared at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and something I couldn't quite decipher. When he spoke, his voice was cold, almost cruel. "It's our anniversary gift, yours and your sister's. We're getting married next month." The world stopped. James's words echoed in my mind, yet they made no sense. My sister? Sophie? Marriage? I looked at the invitation in my hands, reading the names over and over. James Martin and Sophie Roberts. My husband and my sister. "No. I don't understand," I stuttered, tears clouding my vision. "This has to be a joke, a terribly tasteless joke, James." But there was not a trace of humor on his face. He rose and moved away from me as if my proximity burned him. "I'm sorry, Lucy. We didn't want you to find out like this, but, well, things happen." "Things happen?" I repeated in disbelief. The initial shock gave way to a rising anger. "Is that all you have to say? After 5 years of marriage?" For a moment, James seemed ashamed, but only briefly. Then his expression hardened. "Look, I know it's hard to understand now, but in time you'll see it's for the best. Sophie and we connected in a way you and I never did." Every word was like a knife. My own sister, the same person who had helped me pick out my wedding dress, my bridesmaid, had betrayed me. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? 1,000 questions raced through my mind, but I could only ask one. Why? James sighed as if burdened by having to explain. "Lucy, let's be honest. Our relationship wasn't working long before. You were always working. We barely saw each other." Sophie understood the pressures of my job. Enough. I shouted, unable to listen any longer. I sprang up, the crumpled invitation clenched in my fist. "How could you? How could both of you do this to me?" For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of remorse in James's eyes. But it vanished so quickly I wondered if I had imagined it. In its place, I saw something even worse. Pity. "You'll get over it, Lucy. You're strong. You always have been. This is best for everyone. In the end, you'll be alone, just as you always wanted. It's better for you." His words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. How could this man, the one who had once sworn to love and protect me, be so callous? How could my own sister betray me like this? At that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't just my heart, it was my trust, my faith in love, in family. Everything I thought I knew about my life crumbled around me. James continued talking, but I couldn't listen. I got up, staggering toward the door. I needed to get away from him, from that room that suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. "Where are you going?" James asked, his tone mixing irritation with feigned concern. I turned to look at him one last time. The man I loved, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, now seemed a complete stranger. "Far from you," I replied in a voice I barely recognized as my own. Far from this lie. I left the apartment without looking back, the red dress billowing around me like a battle flag. The streets of Seville, usually so inviting, now felt like a hostile labyrinth. I wandered aimlessly, tears streaming down my cheeks and mingling with the drizzle that had begun to fall. I don't know how long I roamed the city. My feet eventually carried me to the Guadalquivir River, where I found myself staring at my distorted reflection in its dark waters. The woman looking back was a stranger, swollen eyes, smeared makeup, hair plastered to her face by the rain. It was there, by the river that had witnessed so many happy moments, that I finally allowed myself to break down. I cried until I had no tears left, for the lost love, for the betrayal, for the life I thought I had that had vanished in one night. But as dawn began to tint the sky with pink, I felt something new stirring within me. I couldn't say exactly what it was, but it was strong, resilient. An inner voice whispered that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something new. I rose, soaked and exhausted, but with a determination I'd never felt before. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The Lucy who would return home would not be the same woman who had fled the night before. That 30th birthday marked the end of one chapter in my life, and the beginning of another, one in which I, and only I, would write the rules. The days following my birthday turned into an endless nightmare. Every morning, as I woke, I enjoyed a brief, blissful ignorance before reality struck again, my husband and my sister. Together. Behind my back. The betrayal was like an open wound that refused to heal, bleeding a little more every time I thought about it. But the worst was yet to come. Naively, I believed I could count on my parents for support. How wrong I was. I vividly remember the day I went to my parents' home in the Triana neighborhood. The heat of June was already palpable, and the air was heavy with the sweet scent of the nearby park's flowers. Normally, that smell would have comforted me, evoking memories of childhood summers. But that day, it only churned my stomach. My mother, Carmen, greeted me at the door with an expression that balanced between worry and something I couldn't quite identify. "Come in, dear," she said, her voice tense. "Your father is in the living room." I stepped into the house where I'd grown up, now feeling like a stranger. My father, Anthony, was seated in his favorite armchair with a newspaper forgotten on his lap. He didn't get up when I entered, which was the first sign something was wrong. "Sit down, Lucy," my mother said, pointing to the sofa. I sat, feeling as if I were about to be judged for a crime I hadn't committed. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm not sure if you've heard, but we know everything," my father interrupted sharply. "James told us." It felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped on me. "James? When?" "He came yesterday," my mother replied, avoiding my gaze. "He explained everything to us." "Everything?" I repeated in disbelief. "And what exactly did he say?" My parents exchanged a look that made me feel nauseous. It was my mother who finally spoke. "He told us about his relationship with Sophie. And he also mentioned the problems you two were having in your marriage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Problems? What problems?" "He cheated on me with my own sister." "Lucy," my father interjected in the tone he used when I was a child and had done something wrong. "We know you're hurt, but you have to understand that these things happen. Marriages have their ups and downs, and sometimes what, Dad?" I interrupted, my anger rising. "Sometimes it's okay to cheat on your wife with her sister?" "It's not that simple, dear," my mother said, her eyes chilling me. "James told us how distant you've been, how little you cared about your marriage. He said you practically pushed him into Sophie's arms." My mother's words stabbed me like daggers. Each one cut deeper than the last. "How can you say that? How can you believe him over your own daughter?" "Lucy," my father sighed, as if tired of the conversation. "You've always been difficult. Ever since you were little. So independent, so focused on your studies and your career. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to your marriage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents, the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally, were blaming me for James and Sophie's betrayal. "Where's Sophie?" I demanded, trying to steady my shaking voice. "I want to talk to her." My parents exchanged that same look, one I now found unbearable. "Sophie isn't here," my mother said. "We thought it best if you didn't see each other for a while." The reality of the situation hit me hard. Not only had I lost my husband and my sister, but now my parents had turned their backs on me. I was alone. I stood up, my legs trembling. "I can't believe you're doing this. Choosing them over me." "We're not choosing anyone," my mother protested weakly, but her eyes betrayed her. They had already made their choice. I left that house, a home that no longer belonged to me, with my heart in shreds. The streets of Triana, usually so welcoming, now felt like a hostile maze. I wandered aimlessly, tears blurring my vision, until I found myself on the Triana Bridge, staring at the Guadalquivir. The river flowed indifferently, oblivious to my pain. How many times had I crossed that bridge as a child, holding my parents' hands or playing with Sophie? Now those memories were tainted with bitterness. The following days were a blur of pain and confusion. I learned from others that James had moved in with Sophie to an apartment downtown. Apparently, they'd been planning everything behind my back for months. While I was overworked at the hospital, pulling endless shifts, they were building their relationship on the ruins of mine. What hurt the most was seeing how people around me reacted. Friends I once considered close suddenly claimed they were too busy to meet up. Colleagues whispered behind my back, casting pitying looks when they thought I wasn't watching. It seemed all of Seville knew about my misfortune, and no one knew how to treat me. One afternoon, while strolling through Maria Luisa Park trying to clear my mind, I ran into an old school friend, Martha. For a moment, I considered turning around to avoid her, but she spotted me before I could escape. "Lucy," she exclaimed, coming over. "It's been so long. How are you?" The simple question, both so innocent and yet so loaded, left me speechless for a moment. How was I? I was shattered, betrayed, alone. But instead of saying all that, I merely shrugged. Getting by, I replied. Martha looked at me with a mix of curiosity and pity. "I heard about James and, well, you know." "I'm so sorry." That insincere tone of false sympathy irritated me more than I expected. "Don't feel sorry," I snapped more harshly than I meant. "It's not your fault that my husband and my sister are traitors." Martha seemed taken aback by my bluntness. Well, these things happen, don't they? I mean, love is complicated and I couldn't take it any longer." "Love? You call destroying a family and betraying the trust of someone who's supposed to care about you love?" My outburst left Martha speechless. She mumbled a hasty apology and quickly walked away, leaving me alone once again. That night, sitting in the small apartment I'd rented in the La Macarena neighborhood, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't allow the betrayal of James and Sophie and the lack of support from my parents to destroy me. With trembling hands, I turned on my laptop and began searching for job opportunities outside Seville. Out of Andalusia. I needed a fresh start, far from the memories, far from the pitying stares and whispers behind my back. I spent hours browsing employment sites, sending my resume to hospitals all over Spain, Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, anywhere far enough to start over. As the sun began to peek through my window, I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that. I'd have to leave behind everything I knew and face the unknown. But anything was better than staying here, drowning in my pain and the betrayal of those I loved most. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was tired, with dark circles and disheveled hair. But there was something new in her eyes, determination. "You can do this, Lucy," I told myself. "You're stronger than anyone thinks. Stronger than you believe." At that moment, my phone rang. It was a message from Sophie. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me open it. "Lou, I know you're angry, I understand. But I hope that someday you can forgive us. James and I truly care for each other. It wasn't premeditated, it just happened. I hope you can be happy for us." The audacity, the sheer brazenness of that message left me breathless. Happy for them? After everything they'd done to me? Instead of replying, I blocked Sophie's number, then James's. And finally, though it pained me, my parents as well. I needed a clean break, a new beginning. That morning, as Seville woke and the streets filled with life, I packed my things. I didn't know where I was headed or what the future would bring. But one thing was certain. The Lucy who walked out of that apartment would not be the same who had gone in. She would be stronger, wiser, and, above all, determined not to let others' betrayal define her life. As I zipped up my suitcase, a mix of fear and excitement washed over me. The familial abyss that had opened before me was deep and dark, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to rediscover myself and build a new life on my own terms. The change didn't come overnight. My first days in Madrid were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt liberated, away from the pitying looks and whispered rumors that had plagued every corner of Seville. On the other, the loneliness in this unfamiliar city sometimes overwhelmed me more than the weight of the betrayal I'd left behind. I settled into a small apartment in Lavapiés, a vibrant, multicultural neighborhood that stood in stark contrast to the Seville I once knew. The narrow, steep streets, the aromas of spices wafting from Indian and Moroccan grocery stores, the constant bustle, everything was new and, in a way, comforting. No one here knew me. No one knew my story. I could be whoever I wanted to be. For the first few weeks, I devoted myself to job hunting relentlessly. I sent my resume to every hospital and clinic in the city, hoping my experience in Seville's emergency room would open a door. But Madrid was competitive and positions were scarce. One afternoon, after yet another fruitless interview, I decided to take a walk in Retiro Park to clear my head. The park was teeming with life, couples strolling hand in hand, children playing, elderly folks feeding the pigeons. For a moment, an overwhelming loneliness took my breath away. Had I made the right decision coming here? Then my phone rang. An unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice a little hoarse from the knot in my throat. "Am I speaking with Dr. Lucy Roberts?" a male voice inquired. "Yes, this is she. This is on behalf of Dr. Alex Vega, director of La Paz University Hospital. We received your resume and would like to schedule an interview with you. Are you available tomorrow at 10? My heart skipped a beat. La Paz was one of the most prestigious hospitals in Madrid. I had sent my resume with little hope, thinking I'd never hear back. Of course, I managed, trying to mask my excitement. "I'll be there." That night, sleep eluded me. I replayed my entire experience in my mind, prepared answers for potential questions, and imagined 1,000 different scenarios. When dawn finally broke, I felt exhausted yet charged with a nervous energy I hadn't felt in ages. La Paz Hospital was an imposing complex. As I walked through its corridors following signs toward Dr. Vega's office, a mix of anxiety and excitement swirled inside me. This could be the new beginning I so desperately needed. Dr. Vega's secretary, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, ushered me into his office. Dr. Vega turned out to be a man in his 50s, with silver hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through you. "Dr. Roberts," he greeted, shaking my hand firmly. "Please have a seat." The interview proceeded in a standard fashion. Questions about my experience in Seville, my specialties, my expectations. I answered as best as I could, striving to project a confidence I wasn't entirely sure I felt. Then Dr. Vega asked a question I hadn't anticipated. "Dr. Roberts, your experience in emergency medicine is impressive. However, I notice a gap in your resume. Could you explain why you decided to leave your position in Seville and come to Madrid?" For a moment, I was stunned. I hadn't expected him to ask so directly. Should I lie? Invent a professional excuse? But something in Dr. Vega's gaze made me decide to tell the truth. "Honestly, Dr. Vega," I began, my voice a little shaky, "I came to Madrid in search of a fresh start. I went through a difficult personal situation in Seville and felt I needed a change of environment to move forward." Dr. Vega studied me in silence for a moment, as if evaluating me. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. "I appreciate your honesty, Dr. Roberts," he said. "Many in your situation might have concocted a professional excuse. The fact that you chose to be sincere speaks volumes about you." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Dr. Vega continued, "You see, in this hospital, we don't just seek technical excellence. We look for resilient individuals, capable of facing challenges and overcoming them. Your decision to leave everything behind and start anew demonstrates a strength of character we value highly." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Could my greatest weakness really be seen as a strength? "We have an opening in our emergency department," Dr. Vega continued. "It's a demanding position, with long hours and plenty of pressure. But I believe you might be the right person for the job. Would you be interested?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "I'm ready for any challenge." Dr. Vega smiled once more. "Excellent. You'll start on Monday. My secretary will provide all the details." I left Dr. Vega's office feeling as if I were dreaming. Not only had I secured a job, but I'd also landed an opportunity at one of Spain's top hospitals. It was more than I had dared to hope for. The following days flew by as I prepared for my new job. On Monday morning, when I walked through the doors of La Paz Hospital in my new uniform, I experienced a blend of nerves and excitement I hadn't felt in ages. The emergency department was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors, nurses, and patients moved in a carefully organized chaos that felt both familiar and comforting. I was introduced to my new colleagues, dedicated professionals passionate about their work. Among them was Elena, a veteran nurse with a warm smile and kind eyes. "Welcome to the team, Lucy," she said as she showed me around. "I know it can be overwhelming at first, but you'll see we're like a family here." Her words stung with a bittersweet reminder. Family. A word that now tasted bitter to me. But I forced a smile and nodded. The first few weeks were exhausting but rewarding. The pace was frantic and the cases were complex and challenging. Yet for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. In the midst of the chaos of emergency medicine, there was no room to dwell on James, on Sophie, on the life I'd left behind. Only the present existed, the patient before me, the next diagnosis, the next life to save. One night, after a particularly grueling shift in which we lost a young accident victim, I found myself crying in the staff locker room. Elena discovered me there and, without saying a word, embraced me. "I know," she whispered softly. "It's hard. But you did well, Lucy. You did everything you could." In that moment, enveloped in the comforting embrace of a woman who barely knew me yet offered solace without asking for anything in return, I felt something inside me begin to heal. Perhaps Madrid, this hospital, these people could become my new home. Months passed, and little by little, I found my place at La Paz. My colleagues became friends, my work turned into a renewed passion. Dr. Vega became a mentor, always willing to offer advice and support. One afternoon, while having coffee in the hospital cafeteria, Dr. Vega surprised me with a proposal. "Lucy," he began, using my first name as he had started to do lately, "I've been observing your work these past few months. You've proven to be not only an excellent doctor, but also a natural leader. We're planning to open a new trauma unit, and I'd like you to lead it." I was speechless. Me, leading a unit? After only a few months here? "But Dr. Vega," I protested weakly, "surely there are others with more qualifications, more experience." Dr. Vega raised a hand to stop me. "There are many experienced doctors, Lucy, but few possess your unique blend of technical skill, empathy, and resilience. You've been through so much and emerged stronger. That's exactly what we need in a trauma unit leader." Tears threatened to spill over. How could this man, who had barely known me a few months ago, see in me something I hadn't even recognized in myself? "You don't have to decide now," Dr. Vega continued. "Think it over. We'll discuss it more next week." That night, sitting in my small apartment in Lavapiés, I reflected on all that had happened in recent months. I had arrived in Madrid broken, betrayed, unsure of what to do with my life. And now, here I was with a promising career, new friends, and an opportunity one never could have imagined. I thought of James, of Sophie, of my parents. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me as it once had. I had discovered a strength within me I never knew I possessed, a resilience that surprised me every day. Gazing out the window at Madrid's bustling streets, I felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in so long, I felt exactly where I was meant to be. Fate, chance, or whatever force had brought me here for a reason. "Thank you," I whispered into the night air, not quite sure whom or what I was thanking. Perhaps life itself, for giving me this second chance. Tomorrow, I decided, I would tell Dr. Vega I accepted the position. It was time to fully embrace this new life, this new Lucy emerging from the ashes of betrayal and pain. The future, for the first time in a long while, looked bright and full of possibility. And I was ready to face it, stronger and wiser than ever. Years passed, and Madrid transformed from a strange city into my home. My life at La Paz Hospital became the center of my world, and the trauma unit I led was recognized as one of the best in the country. I had found my place, my purpose, and although the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer hurt as they once did. One autumn afternoon, while reviewing reports in my office, the past I'd thought was behind me in Seville came knocking again. Elena, my loyal friend and head nurse, entered with a worried expression. "Lucy," she said, her voice tinged with concern, "there's something you need to know. A patient has just arrived, and he's from Seville." A knot formed in my stomach. "And? We take patients from all over Spain, Elena." She shook her head. "It's more than that. The patient is James Martin." For a moment, The world stopped. James. Here. In my hospital. What happened to him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Car accident. He's stable but requires surgery. Dr. Vega thought you should know before. Elena trailed off. I didn't need to hear more. I rose from my chair, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Thank you, Elena. I'll take care of it. I walked toward the room where James was being treated, each step a battle between what I might feel, hatred, indifference, perhaps even a trace of what I once felt for him. When I entered the room, the first thing I noticed was how much he had changed. The James the first remembered, always immaculate and confident, had been replaced by a haggard man with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His eyes, once lively, now appeared dull and sunken. He looked up at me, recognition mingled with shame on his face. Lucy, he murmured, his voice rough. Is it really you? I took a deep breath before answering. Yes, James. It's me. I'm the head of trauma here. How are you feeling? He let out a bitter laugh that quickly turned into a pained grimace. Like life's run me over. Literally. I reviewed his medical records and test results in silence. He needed surgery, but nothing life-threatening. So, what are you doing in Madrid? I finally asked, curiosity overriding my desire to keep my distance. James closed his eyes for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. Everything fell apart, Lucy. The law firm, the marriage with Sophie, everything. A surge of twisted satisfaction rippled through me, quickly replaced by guilt. What was I becoming? I came to Madrid seeking a new beginning, James continued. Ironically, just like you did years ago. And Sophie? I asked, surprising myself at how much I cared about his answer. She left. With someone else. I guess karma really does exist, he replied with a sad smile. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. Lucy, James began, but I interrupted. No, James. I don't need your apologies or explanations. That's all in the past. Now, I'm your doctor, and my job is to ensure you recover. I saw the pain in his eyes, not just physical, but the anguish of a man who had lost everything and realized his mistakes too late. We'll operate on you first thing in the morning, I informed him, slipping back into my professional role. Dr. Sanchez will handle your surgery. He's one of the best. James nodded weakly. Thank you, Lucy. For everything. I left the room, a storm of emotions inside me. On one hand, seeing James like this evoked a mix of pity and a twisted sense of justice. On the other, I recognized just how far I'd come. Seeing him no longer stirred the sharp pain of betrayal, but rather a distant compassion. The following days were a whirlwind. James's surgery was a success, and though I wasn't directly involved, I kept abreast of his progress. Elena, ever perceptive, noticed my unease. Are you all right? She asked one afternoon as we had coffee in the hospital cafeteria. I'm fine, it's just seeing James here, in these circumstances, made me think a lot, I confessed. Elena regarded me with the wisdom and affection that had always defined her. It's normal, Lucy. He was once an important part of your life. But remember how far you've come, how strong you've become. Her words comforted me, reminding me once again why I considered her my best friend. A week after the surgery, I found myself back in James's room. He was physically better, but there was something in his gaze that spoke of a deeper defeat. They're discharging you tomorrow, he informed me as I entered. That's good, I replied, reviewing his latest test results. Your recovery is going well. James stared at me intently. Lucy, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but could we talk? As people, not as doctor and patient. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right. I finish my shift in an hour. I'll be back. That hour dragged on. Part of me wanted to run, avoid a conversation I knew would be painful. But another part, the part that had grown and matured over these years, knew I needed closure. When I returned to his room, I wasn't wearing my lab coat. I was simply Lucy, facing my past head-on. I'm listening, I said, taking a seat by his bed. James took a breath before speaking. First, I want to apologize. I know it's late, Probably too late, but I need you to know how deeply I regret hurting you. I nodded silently, letting him continue. What Sophie and I did was unforgivable. At that time, I thought I was in love, that I had found something special. But the truth is, I was a coward. Instead of confronting the issues in our marriage, I sought an easy way out. And now, I asked softly. Now, I've lost everything, he replied bitterly. The law firm went under a few months ago. Turns out Sophie's family connections weren't as solid as we thought. And Sophie, when the money ran out, she left too. I couldn't help but feel a pang of compassion. I'm sorry, James. Truly. He shook his head. No, don't be sorry. I deserve it. But seeing you here, witnessing what you've become. Lucy, I'm proud of you. I'm deeply sorry for underestimating you. His words hit me harder than I cared to admit. For years, I'd fantasized about this moment, James remorseful and me triumphant. But the reality was different. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Thank you, James, I finally said. But I didn't do this for you or anyone else. I did it for me. He nodded, a small smile gracing his lips. I know. And that's what makes you so remarkable. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years and choices lingering between us. What will you do now? I eventually asked. James shrugged. Start over, I guess. Maybe follow your example and seek a fresh start in a different city. I truly wish you the best, James, I said sincerely. And I meant it. The hatred and resentment I once felt had dissipated, replaced by a kind of peace. James no longer held power over me or my emotions. I rose to leave, but before I could, James spoke once more. Lucy, he said, his voice breaking, thank you. For everything, for being the incredible doctor and person you are, even after everything I did. I hope someday you can forgive me. I turned to look at him one last time. I already have, James. I forgave myself long ago for believing I didn't deserve better. And in doing so, I forgave you too. I left the room feeling lighter than I had in years. Meeting James hadn't reopened old wounds. It had provided the final closure I needed. That night, as I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, I reflected on the turn my life had taken. Out of betrayal and pain had emerged a strength I never knew I possessed. Madrid, which had once been my escape, had become my home. And I, the woman who had once felt shattered and lost, was now stronger and more whole than ever. Seeing James's collapse did not bring me the satisfaction I'd once expected. Instead, it confirmed how far I had come. I was no longer a victim of his betrayal, but the architect of my own destiny. As I gazed out the window at the twinkling lights of Madrid, I felt profound gratitude for the lessons learned, for the people who had supported me along the way, and for the inner strength I had discovered. Tomorrow would be another day at the hospital, full of challenges and responsibilities. But for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace with my past and excited for my future. The moment of revelation had come and gone, leaving me stronger and wiser. And I was ready for whatever life had in store next. The days after my meeting with James in the boardroom passed in a blur of emotions and introspection. Every morning, as I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman different from the one I had been in Seville years ago. I was no longer the wounded, betrayed Lucy, but a strong, confident woman at peace with her past. One afternoon, while having coffee in the hospital cafeteria with Elena, my steadfast friend and confidant, she looked at me with a knowing smile. You know, Lucy? I don't think I've ever seen you so serene, she remarked, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. I smiled, savoring the aroma of my coffee. Really? The truth is, I feel different. As if I've finally closed a chapter that had been open for far too long. Elena nodded, understanding. It's amazing how much you've grown since you arrived here. I remember the first time I saw you. You looked so lost. Her words transported me back to that first day in Madrid when I arrived with nothing more than a suitcase and a broken heart. The contrast with my present self was overwhelming. It's been a long journey, I admitted. But every step, even the painful ones, has brought me here. As we spoke, I noticed Alejandro, the hospital CEO, passing by. He greeted me with a warm smile and a nod. I recalled how he had trusted me with the James situation, and I felt a surge of gratitude. "You know, Elena," I said, turning to her, "I think it's time to give back some of what I've received." Elena raised an intrigued eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "I've been thinking about starting a mentorship program for female doctors. Something to help those who might be going through tough times, just as I did." Elena's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea, Lucy. You could truly make a difference in many women's lives." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon we were brainstorming ideas and possibilities. That very afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with Alejandro to present my proposal. To my surprise and delight, Alejandro not only approved the idea, but also offered the full support of the hospital to implement it. "Lucy," he said with a proud smile, "you've proven to be not only an outstanding doctor, but also an inspiring leader. This program is exactly what we need." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Between my responsibilities in the trauma unit and launching the mentorship program, I barely had time to breathe. But every minute of hard work was worth it. The day of the program's inauguration arrived sooner than I expected. As I prepared to deliver the opening speech, a mix of nerves and excitement bubbled inside me. The auditorium was filled with young women, medical students, and early career doctors, whose expectant faces reminded me of who I once was. "Welcome," I began, my voice echoing in the microphone. "I stand before you today not just as a doctor or as a unit leader, but as someone who has walked a path filled with obstacles and challenges, a path that many of you are undoubtedly walking right now." As I spoke, sharing my story of overcoming betrayal and pain, I saw the eyes of many light up with recognition and hope. I spoke of the betrayal, the heartbreak, but also of the strength that was awakened within me. "The road won't be easy," I continued. "There will be days when you feel like giving up, when the weight of expectations and prejudices seems unbearable. But I promise you, every challenge you overcome will make you stronger, wiser, and more capable." When I finished my speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. What moved me most were the tears in some of the women's eyes and the determined smiles on their faces. In the weeks and months that followed, the program grew beyond my wildest expectations. Women from all over the country began reaching out, seeking guidance and support. Soon, we were organizing conferences, workshops, and one-on-one coaching sessions. One afternoon, while reviewing some applications for the program, I received an unexpected call. It was my mother. "Lucy, dear," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I saw your interview in the newspaper. Your father and we are so proud of you." A lump formed in my throat. It had been years since I'd spoken to my parents, not since that day in Seville when they sided with James and Sophie. "Thank you, Mom," I managed to say. There was an awkward pause before she continued. "Lucy, your father and we wanted to apologize. For everything. For not supporting you when you needed us most. For not seeing how strong and wonderful you are." Tears welled in my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. "I forgive you, Mom," I said softly. "And I miss you." That call marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful reconciliation with my family. It wasn't easy. There were tough conversations and tense moments, but gradually we began rebuilding the bridges we thought were burned. Nearly a year after launching the mentorship program, I received a surprise visit in my office. It was Sophie, my sister. Seeing her standing in my doorway left me breathless. Years had passed since we last met, and time had left its mark on us both. "Hi, Lou," she said timidly, using our childhood nickname. "May I come in?" I nodded at a loss for words. Sophie entered and sat down opposite me, nervously fiddling with the handle of her purse. "I've been following your work," she began. "What you're doing, it's amazing, Lucy. I'm so proud of you." A whirlwind of emotions stirred inside me, pain, anger, and yet a strange sense of relief. "Thank you," I managed. Sophie looked into my eyes, hers brimming with tears. "I know it might be too late, but I need to tell you how sorry I am. What I did, what James and I did to you, was unforgivable." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You're right, Sophie. It was unforgivable. It shattered me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I regret it every single day. But seeing you now, witnessing what you've become. Lucy, you're incredible. And I know I don't deserve it, but do you think that someday you might be able to forgive me? I looked at my sister, the person who had once been my best friend and then my worst enemy, and realized that the hatred and bitterness I once harbored were gone. In their place was a weary compassion. Sophie, I said softly, I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, but for me, because holding on to that hatred was destroying me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean things can go back to how they were. She nodded, understanding. I get it. Thank you for listening. And I want you to know I'm truly happy for you, Lucy. You deserve all this and more. After Sophie left, I sat in my office, reflecting on how far I'd come, from the broken woman who fled Seville to the strong, compassionate leader I had become. Every challenge, every moment of pain had shaped me into who I am today. That evening, as I walked through the streets of Madrid on my way home, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. The city that once was my escape had become my battleground and my victory. Back at my apartment, I stepped out onto the balcony and looked toward Madrid's skyline. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of red and gold, a beautiful reminder that even after the darkest night, a new dawn always arrives. I thought of all the women I was helping through the mentorship program, of the family ties I was slowly mending, of the friends and colleagues who had supported me on this journey. And I thought of myself, the Lucy who had risen from the ashes of betrayal and pain. You did it, I whispered to myself, a smile forming on my lips. You rose from the ashes, and now you're helping others do the same. The future stretched out before me, full of endless possibilities. I no longer feared the unknown because I knew I had the strength to face whatever challenges life threw my way. As the last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, I made a silent promise to keep growing, to keep learning, and most importantly, to continue lending a hand to those who, like me once, needed help finding their way. Because in the end, that is the true victory, not only overcoming our own challenges, but using that experience to light the path for others. And on that starlit Madrid night, I knew I had found my true purpose. The Lucy who had once been betrayed and abandoned no longer existed. In her place stood a strong, compassionate woman determined to make a difference. And she was ready for whatever the future held. The days following my encounter with James in the boardroom passed in a blur of emotions and reflection. Every morning, as I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman different from the one I had been in Seville years ago. I was no longer the wounded, betrayed Lucy, but a strong, self-assured woman at peace with her past. One afternoon, while sharing a coffee in the hospital cafeteria with Elena, my steadfast friend and confidant, she looked at me with a conspiratorial smile. You know, Lucy? I don't think I've ever seen you so serene, she remarked, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. I smiled, savoring the aroma. Really? The truth is, I feel different. As if I've finally closed a chapter that had been open for far too long. Elena nodded in understanding. It's amazing how much you've grown since you arrived here. I remember the first time I saw you. You looked so lost. Her words took me back to that first day in Madrid, when I arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. The contrast with who I was now was staggering. It's been a long journey, I admitted. But every step, even the painful ones, has led me here. As we talked, I saw Alejandro, the hospital's CEO, passing by. He greeted me with a warm smile and a nod. I recalled how he had trusted me to handle the James situation, and I felt a swell of gratitude. You know, Elena, I said, turning toward her, I think it's time I give back some of what I've received. Elena raised an intrigued eyebrow. What do you have in mind? I've been thinking about launching a mentorship program for female physicians, something to help others who might be going through tough times, just as I did. Elena's eyes lit up. That's a brilliant idea, Lucy. You could truly change so many lives. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon we found ourselves brainstorming ideas and possibilities. That same afternoon, I arranged a meeting with Alejandro to present my proposal. To my delight, Alejandro not only approved the idea, but also offered full support from the hospital to bring it to life. "Lucy," he said with pride, "you've proven to be not only an exceptional doctor, but also an inspiring leader. This program is exactly what we need." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Between my duties in the trauma unit and launching the mentorship program, I barely had a moment to breathe. Yet every minute of hard work was worth it. The day of the program's inauguration came sooner than expected. As I prepared to deliver my opening speech, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The auditorium was filled with young women, medical students, and early career physicians whose eager faces reminded me of who I once was. "Welcome," I began, my voice resonating in the microphone. "I'm here today not just as a doctor or unit leader, but as someone who has walked a path filled with obstacles and challenges, a path that many of you are walking right now." As I spoke, sharing my journey of overcoming betrayal and pain, I saw recognition and hope light up in many eyes. I spoke of the heartbreak of the betrayal, but also of the inner strength that emerged. "The road ahead won't be easy," I continued. "There will be days when you feel like giving up, when the burden of expectations and prejudice seems unbearable. But every challenge you overcome will make you stronger, wiser, and more capable." When I finished my speech, the room erupted into applause. What moved me most were the tears in some of their eyes and the determined smiles on their faces. In the weeks and months that followed, the program grew beyond my wildest dreams. Women from across the country began reaching out, seeking guidance and support. Soon, we were organizing conferences, workshops, and individual coaching sessions. One afternoon, while reviewing some applications, I received an unexpected call. It was my mother. "Lucy, darling," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I saw your interview in the newspaper. Your father and we are so proud of you." A lump formed in my throat. It had been years since I'd spoken to my parents, not since the day in Seville when they took James and Sophie's side. "Thank you, Mom," I managed. There was an awkward silence before she continued. "Lucy, your father and we wanted to apologize. For everything. For not supporting you when you needed us most. For not recognizing how strong and wonderful you are." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. "I forgive you, Mom," I whispered softly. "And I miss you." That phone call marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful reconciliation with my family. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations and tense moments, but gradually we began rebuilding the bridges we thought were burned. Nearly a year after launching the mentorship program, I received a surprise visit in my office. It was Sophie, my sister. Seeing her there, standing in the doorway, took my breath away. Years had passed since we last met, and time had left its mark on us both. "Hi, Lou," she said timidly, using our childhood nickname. "May I come in?" I nodded, unable to form words. Sophie entered and sat down in front of me, nervously twisting the strap of her purse. "I've been following your work," she began. "What you're doing, it's incredible, Lucy. I'm so proud of you." A whirlwind of emotions stirred within me, pain, anger, and a strange sense of relief. "Thank you," I managed. Sophie looked into my eyes, tears brimming. "I know it might be too late, but I need to tell you how sorry I am. What I did, what James and I did to you, was unforgivable." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You're right, Sophie. It was unforgivable." It shattered me. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know. And I regret it every single day. But seeing you now, seeing what you've become. Lucy, you're amazing. And I know I don't deserve it, but do you think you could ever forgive me?" I looked at my sister, the person who had once been my best friend and later my worst enemy, and realized that the hatred and bitterness were gone. In their place was a weary compassion. "Sophie," I said softly, "I forgave you long ago. Not for you, but for me, because holding on to that anger was only hurting me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were." She nodded, understanding. "I get it. Thank you for listening, and I'm really happy for you, Lucy. You deserve all of this and more." After Sophie left, I sat in my office, reflecting on how far I had come, from the shattered woman who fled Seville to the strong, compassionate leader I had become. Every challenge, every moment of pain had shaped me into who I am today. That night, as I walked home through the streets of Madrid, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and gratitude. The city that had once been my escape was now my battleground and my triumph. Back in my apartment, I stepped out onto the balcony and looked at Madrid's skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, a reminder that even after the deepest darkness, a new dawn always arrives. I thought of all the women I was helping through the mentorship program, of the family ties I was slowly mending, of the friends and colleagues who had supported me along the way. And I thought of myself, the Lucy who had risen from the ashes of betrayal and pain. "You did it," I whispered to myself, a smile forming on my lips. "You rose from the ashes, and now you're helping others do the same." The future stretched out before me, full of endless possibilities. I no longer feared the unknown because I knew I had the strength to face whatever challenges life threw my way. As the last ray of sunlight faded on the horizon, I made a silent promise to keep growing, to keep learning, and most importantly, to continue extending a hand to those who, like I once did, needed help finding their way. Because in the end, that is the true victory, not only overcoming our own challenges, but using that experience to light the path for others. And on that starlit Madrid night, I knew I had found my true purpose. The Lucy who was once betrayed and abandoned no longer existed. In her place stood a strong, compassionate woman determined to make a difference. And she was ready for whatever the future held. Later, the days following my encounter with James in the boardroom passed in a blur of emotions and introspection. Every morning, as I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman very different from the one I had been in Seville years ago. I was no longer the wounded, betrayed Lucy. I had become a strong, confident woman at peace with her past. One spring morning, while reviewing reports in my office, I received a call that would once again change everything. It was Alejandro, the hospital's CEO. "Lucy, I need you in my office right now," he said, his voice unusually urgent. "There's a situation that requires your attention." Intrigued and a bit worried, I hurried to his office. When I entered, I found him sitting behind his desk, a serious expression on his face. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. "We have a delicate matter at hand." I sat, curiosity mounting. "What is it about, Alejandro?" He took a deep breath before speaking. "We've received a rather peculiar loan application. Normally, I wouldn't get involved in these matters, but given the circumstances, I believe you should handle it." "I don't understand," I said, confused. "Why me? I'm not in charge of financial matters." Alejandro fixed me with a steady gaze. "Because the applicant is James Martin." It felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped over me. "James? But why would he come here for a loan?" "Apparently, he's desperate," Alejandro explained. "He's been trying to secure funds for a new business venture, and somehow he learned that our hospital has a loan program for medical entrepreneurs. He lied on his application, saying it was for a private clinic." I fell silent, processing the information. James, the man who had once taken everything from me, was now here, asking for help. The irony was not lost on me. "What do you want me to do?" I finally asked. Alejandro leaned back in his chair. "I want you to meet with him. Evaluate his proposal and make the decision you deem appropriate." "I trust your judgment, Lucy." I nodded slowly. "When?" "He's waiting in the boardroom right now." My heart skipped a beat. "Now? But I'm not ready." Alejandro gave a slight smile. "I believe you're more ready than you think. Go, Lucy. Face this once and for all." My legs trembled as I walked toward the boardroom, my mind a storm of emotions and thoughts. How would James react upon seeing me? And how would I react? I took a deep breath and opened the door. There he was, standing by the window, gazing out. At the sound of the door, he turned, and in a matter of seconds his expression shifted from expectation to shock. "Lucy," he whispered. What are you doing here?" I sat at the head of the table, striving to maintain my composure. "I should be asking you the same thing, James. Please, have a seat." He obeyed, moving as if in a trance. I don't understand. I was supposed to meet with the loan committee. And you are meeting them, I said firmly. I'm here to evaluate your business proposal. I watched as the reality of the situation settled on his face. The man who once looked at me with love and then disdain now stared back with a mixture of fear and desperation. Lucy, he began, but I interrupted. Let's keep this professional, James. I'm here to assess your proposal, nothing more. He swallowed hard and began outlining his business plan, a fertility clinic. As he spoke, I reviewed the documents he had submitted, noting inconsistencies and gaps in his financial plan. James, I said once he finished, your proposal has several issues. For one, you have no experience in the medical field. Besides, your financial projections are unrealistic. He sank into his chair. But I have contacts. I can make this work. Contacts? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. The same contacts that led to your downfall in Seville? James paled. How do you know? That doesn't matter, I cut in. What matters is that your proposal isn't viable. I can't approve this loan. Desperation overtook him. Lucy, please. I need this. It's my last chance. For a moment, I felt a pang of compassion. Then I remembered everything I'd been through and how far I'd come. I'm sorry, James, I said, my voice steady but unyielding. I can't risk the hospital's money on a project doomed to fail. He fell silent, defeated. Then his voice broke. Is it because of what happened between us? Is this revenge? That question stung more than I expected. Did he really think I was that kind of person? No, James, I replied, looking him straight in the eyes. This isn't about our past. It's a purely professional decision. Your proposal simply does not meet our criteria. I watched as the reality of his failure sank in. The once confident, arrogant man was now reduced to someone desperate, someone who had hit rock bottom. What am I supposed to do now? He murmured, more to himself than to me. I gathered my papers and stood. That's no longer my problem, James. I suggest you seek professional advice before attempting another venture. As I turned to leave, I paused and looked back at him one last time. Good luck with your new life. I hope you find a way to rebuild it. I exited the room, leaving James alone with his defeat. Walking back to my office, I felt a mix of relief, sorrow, and a strange sense of closure. Elena was waiting for me in my office. How did it go? She asked, concern in her voice. I sank into my chair. Intense, but necessary. Are you all right? She pressed, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I reflected for a moment before answering. Yes, I'm fine. In fact, I feel better than ever. And it was true. Facing James under those circumstances, having the power to decide his future yet choosing to act professionally rather than out of revenge, showed me just how much I had grown. You know what, Elena? I said with a small smile forming. I think I've finally closed that chapter of my life. Elena smiled back, understanding. I'm so happy for you, Lucy. That night, as I headed home, I reflected on the twists and turns my life had taken. From being the victim of James's betrayal to becoming someone who held the power to shape his future, it all came down to not letting the past dictate my actions. As I rode the metro, watching Madrid's lights flicker by, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long and arduous, but I'd finally reached a point where I could look back without pain and forward with hope. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched out before me, vibrant and alive. I thought of all I had gained, a successful career, true friends, and most importantly, finding myself again. The memory of James, defeated in that boardroom, no longer brought me pain. Instead, I felt a mixture of compassion and gratitude, compassion for the man he had become, and gratitude for the lesson his betrayal had taught me. Thank you, I whispered into the night air, not quite sure whom or what I was thanking, maybe fate, maybe myself, for finding the strength to overcome it all. Tomorrow would bring another day at the hospital, full of challenges and responsibilities. But for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace with my past and excited for the future. The moment of reckoning had come and gone, leaving me stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead.